I have never used drugs. There was never the right occasion, nor any particular desire. Yet somehow, as if guided by a hand I could not see, my entire life became entangled with the world of addiction and recovery. The entanglement was not planned. It unfolded in three acts, separated by years and continents, each one drawing me deeper into a question I did not know I was asking. The first act began in the 1980s in the Soviet city of Sverdlovsk, where I worked as a paramedic on an emergency ambulance crew. Drug addiction was still an exotic rarity in the USSR. The country's vice of choice was alcohol, reliable, state produced, and deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. Occasionally, we encountered people who sniffed gasoline or swallowed pills pilfered from hospital supplies, but these were marginal figures, not the harbingers of epidemic that I was to come. What I saw instead was a society saturated with a legal drug, its consequences everywhere, in the frozen bodies we collected from snowdrifts on winter nights, in the domestic violence calls, in the cirrhotic livers of men who were not yet 40. The lesson, though I did not articulate it at any time, was that the legality of a substance has nothing to do with its capacity to destroy. The second act took place in Jerusalem in the early 1990s. I had emigrated to Israel and, through a sequence of events that felt accidental but in retrospect seems inevitable, found myself working in a rehabilitation center in the Lifta Valley. The center occupied an old Arab stone house on the hillside overlooking the ruins of a village abandoned during the 1948 war, a place where past and present coexisted in uneasy silence. We housed 14 to 16 residents at a time, most of them heroin addicts. The local slang for heroin was coke parsi, Persian stuff, and the culture of addiction in Israel was already well established. It was here that I encountered the 12-step program of Narcotics Anonymous, the principle of just for today, and the phrase that would stay with me for decades. We love you. We hate your disease. It was also here that I first observed a pattern that would later prove central to the theory this book presents. A single addict placed among non users could remain clean for months, but the introduction of a second addict almost invariably triggered relapse in both. The third act came years later in rural Canada, where I had become a clergyman and opened a shelter in my own home. I had not planned to return to the world of addiction, but the world of addiction came to me. The people who arrived at my door were not only drug users, they were people on the margins of life, struggling with alcohol, homelessness, poverty, and despair. Over 9 years, I watched the same patterns repeat, the cycle of use and remission, the progressive self deception, the isolation, the paradoxical logic of people who had lost everything and yet could not bring themselves to stop. The substances were different, the country was different, the language was different, the structure was the same. It was this structural sameness that eventually drove me to ask the question that went beyond clinical observation: why does the trap always look the same? Why does heroin addiction in Jerusalem follow the same patterns as alcohol dependence in Canada, as gambling compulsion in Las Vegas, as social media obsession in a teenager's bedroom? If the substances were so different, if some involve molecules and receptors while others involve no chemistry at all, then the engine of addiction cannot be chemical. It must be something more abstract, something structural. The answer I arrived at, developed over years of work, is a mathematical framework called the extractive oscillator with sensor degradation, or EOS. The framework identifies 5 conditions that, when satisfied simultaneously, produce addictive dynamics, regardless of what the substance or behavior happens to be. These 5 conditions explain the oscillatory cycle, the progressive loss of self awareness,